Hello and welcome to Maeshowe on this winter's day. My name is Sandra Miller. I'm one of the rangers here in the heart of Neolithic Orkney World Heritage Site. On our programme, we're going to give you some more information about Maeshowe. We're going to hear from local experts who will tell us about the special significance of the tomb, and we'll hear from some writers who have been inspired by this amazing site. So, to learn more about Maeshowe, to start you off, here's a short clip that was filmed during the summer in Orkney.
Maeshowe Chambered Cairn is situated on the mainland of Orkney, a group of islands off the north coast of Scotland. The mound, chamber and surrounding bank and ditch of Maeshowe were all built around 5,000 years ago, and the site would have been a dominant feature in the Neolithic landscape. From here you can see other prehistoric monuments, including the Stones of Stennis. Slightly further away is the Ring of Brodgar, and further still is Skara Brae. Together with Maeshowe itself, these sites now form much of the heart of Neolithic Orkney World Heritage Site. The adjacent lochs of Stennis and Harry would have helped support communities, and nearby the Ness of Brodgar provides evidence that this was a thriving and populous community who had the time, skill and resources to construct large ceremonial buildings. What would Maeshowe have been like 5,000 years ago, and what was it used for?
Some lovely sunny footage there of Orkney. Unfortunately, as you all know, it isn't always a nice warm day, so we've decided to come into the tomb. And I'm pleased to be able to tell you that I've been joined by Professor Colin Richards from the University of the Highlands and Islands Archaeology Department. Colin, it's great to see you, looking nice and festive in your jumper there.
Feeling festive.
Good.
Especially after the snow yesterday.
Yeah, I know. Colin, I think the big question that we all have about Maeshowe is what on earth is it and how old is it?
Well, I suppose that's the question we ask as well. It's a fantastic monument and it's on a scale which is unknown for the other Orcadian passage graves. It's very different from them as well. It's built differently. Its magnitude is enormous. This is about wonder, awe, amazement. This really is a monument, a spectacular monument. When was it built? Certainly when excavations in the ditch took place, at the very bottom of the ditch, there was some peat that was dated to about 2,700, 2,800. So this is around 3,000, the same date as other passage graves have been built in Ireland and Jersey.
Oh, wow. Every time I come in here, I'm always impressed by this amazing architecture here. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what type of construction technique was actually used here?
Well, on a massive scale, it's corbelling. So they bring it up and it slowly comes in. So you get enormous height and it allows this big area inside to be re-roofed. And it's the height which is, I think, really important here because the passage is very narrow, it's very low. You come in, suddenly opens out in front of you, and that really is a spectacle.
Yeah. A real awe-inspiring sight, perhaps.
You kind of think this is what it's all about. This is meant to impress. Now, who it was meant to impress is another question.
Yeah. I've noticed these stones in each of the four corners of the tomb here. You know, do they have any purpose? They don't appear to be holding anything up.
Well, originally, it was thought that these were called buttresses to support the corbelling in each of the corners. We now know that's the worst thing you can do. You try and support corbelling, it collapses. So these are superfluous to construction.
But how are they moving them? How are they raising them up to this great height?
Well, people ask the same about Stonehenge.
Yes.
How do they? And there's all these. That's the one thing we'll never know as archaeologists. We just don't know. We can guess that they dragged them on sleds, on rollers. Lots of people involved. We have anthropological accounts of doing the same in Sumba in Indonesia. It's all about gathering lots of people together. It's not how few people can do it, how easy you can do it. It's how many people you can get together. It's a ceremony. And sometimes we kind of try and use 20th, 21st century logic to understand, you know, the efficiency. Yeah. It's all about spectacle. It's all about people.
And who's using Maeshowe? Is this kind of for everybody, or is it for kind of maybe a priestly elite to use it?
Well, I intimated that it was all about spectacle and display, but it's quite possible that spectacle and display was all embodied in the construction of the monument and not subsequent use. That's a bit alien to us because we build something and then use it. But maybe the spectacle was in the construction, and let me explain why. Here we've got an aerial shot of Maeshowe. And you see there it is in the middle, surrounded by a platform, surrounded by a ditch. Now that's a big, deep ditch. It's rock cut in places, and surprise, surprise, there's no entrance. Oh. Now, so if you think of this as a unitary construction, which I think it probably was, you've got the strong possibility that once it's built, no one's going into it, or no one human, because like I say, that's a really deep ditch, and there was a wall around the outside. It'd be really difficult to get into the monument. You'd have to scramble, and it's quite likely there was water in that as well. Whereas at the Stones of Stennis and Ring of Brodgar, they've got ditches, but they've got causeways to let people in. Maeshowe hasn't.
I can see in this picture, and it's actually something that we can see in the landscape here in Orkney, that Maeshowe is always very noticeable within that landscape. Is this deliberate?
Well, maybe that goes back to this basic architecture of the monument, because what they've done is they've brought the monument down into the realm of the living. So it's very close to Barnhouse, it's very close to the Ness of Brodgar, there's other settlements we know around it. Maybe when you bring something of the dead down into the realm of the living, that's why you have to create these barriers. It's almost like they're wrapping it to keep something in, or to protect people from on the outside. So they brought it very close to the living, but they wrapped it and contained it. It's bound. And maybe it's like an island in an island world.
Fascinating. You might have actually noticed while Colin was pointing out too about the stones, that there were actually runic inscriptions on the stones. Now we're going to see a short film about them.
The interior walls of Maeshowe are marked with many runes. This is a form of writing used by the Norse people who lived in Orkney in medieval times. The letters are made up from a series of straight lines. These runes were carved into the walls by a group of visitors who found their way into Maeshowe many centuries after it had fallen from use as a tomb. Seeing the runes now is a particularly special and unique link to the past. You can imagine the personalities and characters of some of these individuals through their graffiti artwork.
That was brilliant. I've been joined here now by Dr. Ragnal Joslin from the University of the Highlands Islands, who has a specialism in runes. Particularly, she's written about runes here in Orkney. It's lovely to see you here. I wonder if you could tell us maybe a little bit about the runes. For example, what style of runes have they used here?
Yeah, there's two styles of runes here. One is the normal younger fruit art medieval Scandinavian style, but there's the secret twig runes. It's a type of cipher code. So if you come over here, I'll show you. Here, the first two lines are in the medieval younger fruit art runes, where it says, Ingebjörg the fair widow, many a woman has gone stooping in here, a great show off. But below, these runes that look like trees with branches is the code. So what you need to do is divide the runic alphabet into 3 groups and then indicate with the branches which group and which rune within that group. And then you can count your way to find out what it says. And here it says Erlinger, the signature of the carver.
Oh, clever, clever Vikings. There are loads of runes here in the tomb. Do you have any particular favourites?
So many favourites, I can't choose, but there's a lovely one that runs all the way up this cornerstone, which talks about a treasure. Says it shall be true as I say, that treasure was carried away. Treasure was carried away over 3 nights before they broke this mound. They've started low and gone up, 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 until I can't reach any higher, and then onto the next stone.
Great. I was wondering about how they made sense of the tomb. Did they have any perception, the Norsemen, of actually how old Maeshowe was when they broke in here?
They knew it was old because over on the opposite wall they've written this mound was built before Lothbrok's. Lothbrok was a legendary Viking in a saga. So what they mean is that it's very old indeed, but they couldn't know that it was 5,000 years. They would have seen burial mounds from earlier in the Viking Age over in mainland Scandinavia. Some of them can be a similar size to this, and the larger it is, the more important is the person in it. So I think when they saw this, they would have thought it belonged to a legendary king or earl or ruler from the past, maybe 200 or 300 years before their time. And they called it Orkahaug. So I think they thought of this as the burial place of the founder of the earldom of Orkney, who might have been called Orki in their imagination.
So we've come over to the other side of the tomb now to have a look at some of the other things we've got here. I was just wondering, are there any of the carvings here in Maeshowe something that we would recognise today?
In the content of the graffiti, yes, there's a lot about love, beautiful women, thirst for adventure, heroism. Yeah, but there's also these beautiful animal carvings. We've got a snake and something that looks like a seal or an otter, possibly with a fish in its mouth. And then the beauty, the Maeshowe dragon. Personally, I call it the Maeshowe lion because it's a figure that's quite typical for medieval church art. You see it both on the continent and in Scandinavia. It's a stylized lion, but then again, it's a fantastic beast, so who knows, it could be a dragon. It's got his face looking backwards and one leg lifted high. And the tail goes in between its legs, which is also very typical of the style. Now, the unusual thing about this is that rather than the tail emerging from behind its back like normal, it seems to emerge from the middle of his belly, which looks like he's been stabbed, stabbed with his own tail.
Yeah. So, you know, we describe it as a lion. Some people might think it's a dragon. Do any of the runes actually refer to the kind of traditional tales that the Vikings might have told?
Yes, they were very interested in literature, and you can see that in the inscription. So just behind me here, it says that these runes were carved by the man most skilled in runes in the Western Ocean, and carries on up here with the axe that Gaut Trandelson owned in the south of the country. And that's a reference to a saga, Njal saga, and this figure who owned the axe. So we know that they were reading sagas or hearing oral tellings of these saga stories. A bit further on as well, there's a reference to Lothbrok. There's one that speaks about a Viking. So we can see that they were very much into literature and poetry at the time. But then there's the conversation about the treasure. And I think that also links in with stories they were telling each other. What motivated them to break in here in the first place was that they thought that the dead in the mound was dead but alive and living in the mound, guarding a treasure. So the right hero could take that as a challenge, break in through the roof, lower himself in, challenge the dead undead to single combat, win, chop his head off, and then take the treasure away with him. And the treasure might be a cauldron of gold, but also symbols of kingship, such as a special sword or a belt or a ring or something like that, that marks the hero out as somebody who has the right to lead others.
So folktale and legend would have been really important to them.
Absolutely.
Talking of which, we're going to hear now from well-known Orcadian storyteller Tom Muir.
There was an old man who lived in Harry, and he was a great fiddle player. In fact, he claimed that he played for the fairies. Not only that, but he had played at 4 fairy weddings. Now, people were a bit wary of, offending fairies or anybody that knew the fairies. But there was a young man in the parish who was a blacksmith, and he didn't believe in the fairies. And he told the old man that, he was lying. And the old man was furious, and he said, "If you don't believe me, then join me at the night of the full moon at the Knowes." Now, there were some mounds there that were large burial mounds, and this was said to be the home of the fairies. And so, on the night of the full moon, the blacksmith went down to the Knowes, and there was the old man playing his fiddle. "Now, are you sure you want to see the fairies?" said the old man, "because, it doesn't end well for some people that see them for the first time. You can still back out now, nobody will be any the wiser." "I've come to see the fairies," said the blacksmith, "and I am not leaving until I see them." Well, the old man started to play. He played a tune, he played another, and he played for about an hour. And there was no sign of any fairies. And the blacksmith was getting very pleased with himself, thinking, well, obviously they don't exist. And then the old man remembered, "Oh, of course, there's a fairy christening tonight at Maeshowe. They'll be doing their playing, I'd better go there. But I can't go there tonight because it's too far for me to walk. I'm too old. There's no way I could walk all the way to Maeshowe." "That's not a problem," said the blacksmith. "I'll carry you." So he picked up the old man and his fiddle, and he carried him all the way to Maeshowe, and he took him up to the top of the mound, and he plopped him down right on the top of it. And the old man started to play a fairy reel. And he played another tune, and another, and another, and another hour passed. And then he said, "Oh, I've just remembered, of course, there's a fairy wedding on tonight in Orkney. They'll all be at that. And it's about 4 a.m. now, so it's too late to go there tonight because the sun will be rising soon. So I'm afraid you've missed your chance to see the fairies." And so the blacksmith picked him up and he carried him home again. And he never saw the fairies. I don't know whether he ever believed in it or not, but the old man kept his reputation. There was a man from Stennis, and he was going home late one night. He'd been visiting friends, and his road took him past the great mound at Maeshowe. Now, people were afraid of the mound that time because they believed it was the home of fairy folk. And so he was a bit apprehensive when he was going past it. And also he was worried about the fact that it must be getting near midnight. He took out his pocket watch and he had a look at it. And to his horror, it was on the stroke of midnight. And then he heard laughter coming from the mound. And it was a laughter that he'd never heard before. I mean, it was obviously not people, but it had a slightly malicious tinge to it as well. And the next thing he knew, he found himself being lifted up into the air and suddenly speeding through the air at a tremendous rate. And the man was absolutely terrified. And the next thing that he knew, he was set down on Broad Street in Kirkwall, right in front of St. Magnus Cathedral. And when he looked up at the cathedral clock, it said it was 5 past midnight. He'd been transported from Maeshowe to Kirkwall in just 5 minutes.
Young or old, everybody loves a good story, and nobody tells them like Tom. I'm delighted to be joined by Tom here in the tomb. It's great to see you, Tom. It's been a long time since we've seen each other. Tom, you tell stories all over the world. You have an international reputation and you tell stories of Orkney communities to different communities all over the world. How did you start telling stories?
By accident, like most things. I was republishing the works of a guy called Walter Trell Denison and was asked if I would go and give some talks for Aberdeen University about folklore, and I thought, well, what better than actually just to tell a story rather than droning on for ages, and that kind of, it led from there. It was complete chance.
Orkney's landscape inspires lots of artists and writers and musicians and things like that. How does Orkney's landscape kind of lend itself to storytelling?
Oh, it's perfect. I mean, the landscape here really, it steers the stories. And so you have stories about everything from mounds, like this one, to hills and lochs, but they're very site specific. They're, you know, it's like, it's that stone there. No, not that one, that one. You know, it's really is honed in on one place, which is a bit different from a lot of stories, which kind of goes, you know, a long time ago in a forest, you know, what forest? Well, any forest. This is like, no, that mound there. So yeah, it's this whole landscape is legendary.
And are there any more stories about mounds, say like here in Maeshowe? Is there any more you can tell us?
Oh yeah, when Farner started excavating Maeshowe, he was warned by the local folk that there was a creature, a spirit called the Hog Boy that lived here, and he possessed great strength and shouldn't be kind of messed with. And I don't know whether he encountered him, but I mean, a Hog Boy or Hogbone is it's a Viking thing actually, a tradition where the person who broke out a land, you know, a farm, is buried in a mound, and then they protect the family and they bring good luck to the, you know, the farm, the prosperity, the livestock. But they can also, if you don't treat them well, they can make your life hell. It's interesting that Farrer was an MP and he lost his seat at the next election, so maybe that had something to do with it. But offerings were left for hogbones on mounds. You would share the produce. So milk and cheese, butter and bread and stuff like that, and ale would be poured on the mound and left as an offering. So, and there was a story as well that local women would come down, young women would come down here on the night of the full moon with a casey, a straw basket full of ashes, and dump it on top of the mound and then urinate on it. So, probably a fertility thing. So we don't really know, but mounds were associated with spirits and were feared. People were genuinely scared not to annoy the trows, as they called them, the fairy folk that lived in them. So it was interesting that when we can read in Orkney Ingasaga that Earl Harold Madison, who had been deposed and kicked out the islands, came back to do a surprise raid on the 6th of January. He ended up with a group of men here, sheltering from a blizzard inside the tomb here at Maeshowe, which must have been open, obviously, at the time. And that 2 of his men went mad spending the night in here, which they said slowed them down. Very understated, the saga. But it shows you that if that is true, then probably, and it was written not long after the event, really, that fear could maybe drive you mad. So these places were feared and were avoided, which is why they were protected.
What marks a good story?
Something that engages with people. I mean, it holds your attention, it entertains you, but I also like stories with a bit of a message as well, especially ones about community and about sharing and about looking out for people and about decency and kindness, basically. I think that's something that gets overlooked too much these days, and it doesn't do us any great credit not to do that. But yeah, so some of these stories can be really beautiful.
What marks a good storyteller?
You have to love the stories. You also have to be what we would call a yapper dirt. Somebody that likes to talk. So you have to really be a people person. You have to engage with people. You have to want to speak to people, but you have to have that love in your heart for the stories and be able to look somebody in the eye and tell them a story and know that you've moved them in some way, whether it's you make them laugh, you make them cry. You know, it's touching someone's heart. And so, yeah, I think if you can do that, then you've cracked it.
Yeah. Tom, we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
Do you think someday they'll tell stories about us, maybe in 5,000 years?
Oh, for sure. But it won't be stories, Sandra. Be legends.
Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we're going to go to another Orcadian voice. We'll hear from poet Allison Miller, who has recently written a poem about Maeshowe, and it's in Orcadian dialect.
Midwinter at Maeshowe. St. Magnus, keep for us a jar of light beyond sun and star. I have a deep-rooted belief that what has once existed can never die, not even the frailest things, spindrift or clover scent or glitter of star on a wet stone. George Mackay Brown. It doesna look like a day for it. A curtain of rain shimmering out to the west, the hoy hills veiled in mist. You hae to watch your feet. Puddles new mead will sigh through your socks and boots, sheep pearls flung about like beads. Wait though, a glisk o' silver on the loch, faint glimmer on a pool. Rising for the field, scaling shell malines o' light, a flock o' chaldros, pipe and lewd. They'll always swing into that plink, never heed their pleeping, to shack out glitter for their wings. Look up as they flee, see the lochs, the stones. At the cleft in the hills, a glim o' light. Scant hate there, but the thought warms your bones. So come thou to the hive under the mound, where the queen bee's sun spreads her honey gold on the shortest day with the mirk all round. Tilda down the path bent o'er to the chamber, let your eyes grow used with the grimlins, and your ears pick up words catched in amber. O the skald and the artist and their friends comed into the tomb for the first time at the solstice to see with their own een the sunset floor in a blink on the stone. They stand around amazed, speaking low, wondering about the folk that's gone. Later, in the paper, the bard describes the crepuscular whispering figures you were among, wonders about the tribe of folk that hauled the stones to big Maeshowe, their knowledge of mathematics and the stars, their building skills, engineering know-how, secrets ta'en with them to their own graves. Poet, painter, friends, all away no tay, as we that come in here must one day leave, sooner or later. But for now, turn this bowl of death right hour, brim up, watch the light pour out to shine and burn with a tournament of 5 millennia, gathering, hadding, bottling, keeping the last rays of every shortest day, every Yule solstice for 5,000 year, on the one fleeting day the sun draws breath, afore warming the sea, wakening the earth. See the light travel up ayont star, ayont moon and mother sun that borehead. It can never die, says the Orkney bard. Inside the tomb, the runes, the leafless trees of Vikings carved with great pride in the stone. Outside, bare fields. Whatever we had screeved, it's the same words, plew, seed, breer, barley, herst, breed, ale, page after page of brune tilth turned on the land, the same old Sam New Tale.
That was absolutely fantastic. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined now by poet Allison Miller. It's great to have you here in the tomb. I was just going to ask you, when you sat down to write your poem about Maeshowe, was there anything that particularly inspired you?
Well, I've got a very particular memory about Maeshowe that I just love and I've treasured ever since it happened. When I was a student and I came home from university for Christmas, I was sitting in my mum and dad's house in Kirkwall, and I looked out and I thought, it's a bright day. So I ran down the road, jumped on the bus and came to Maeshowe. And as I came into the tomb, I crawled in, as you do, and came into the gloom of the tomb. And as my eyes got used to it, I realised I was in here with George Mackay Brown, and who's obviously our most famous local poet, and Ian McInnes, a local painter, and Archie Bevan, who's another local. The three of them did so much for the arts in Orkney, the three of them. So I was here with them then, and it's the only time I've ever seen the setting sun in Maeshowe, the only time, the one and only time. But what a special time! So that was in my mind when I started to write the poem. And it's particularly because this year is the centenary of George Mackay Brown's birth. It just passed on the 17th of October there. The group I work with has been doing a lot of work about that. He wrote about that experience he had just after that in the paper when he had a column in the Orcadian. He wrote about what it was like being in here when the sun flowered briefly on the stone, is the way he put it. So I've used some of his words, but in a different way in my poem.
Fantastic. You know, what I really enjoyed about your poem is the fact that it's written in Orcadian dialect, something that all of us Orcadians are really very proud of. Do you think writing in dialect lends itself particularly to poetry?
Well, it's an interesting one because George Mackay Brown didn't write in Orkney dialect. He wrote in very beautiful English, but it was English mostly. But more recently, there's been more folk writing in Orcadian, writing poetry in Orcadian. Yeah. It's not been such a tradition here in Orkney as it has been in, say, in Shetland. But I think more and more folk are starting to do it now. And you know, the words are so bonny. The words are so kind of expressive and colourful, and a lot of the words in Orcadian are about the weather and about farming and about fishing and all that kind of things. The traditional aspects of Orkney that we want to celebrate and want to retain, really. And also, you know, when I get to school, and it probably happened to you as well, you very quickly were told no to speak in Orcadian, and you certainly never learned to write in Orcadian. So that word your granny said a while ago that you might have, if things had been different, you might have used in your writing in the classroom, that just disappeared. And we're sort of trying to find them, you know, tack them back again now. That's what's happening now, I think. So it's quite an exciting time in Orcadian poetry, I think, as well.
Yeah, it is. I think for me it's absolutely terrific to see folk kind of recognise an Orcadian, and actually, you know, I might even try a bit of poetry myself.
Oh, please do.
Thank you, Alison. That was just brilliant. We're going to go now and actually have a look at a film about the winter solstice here in the tomb at Maeshowe.
Maeshowe is accessed by crouching or crawling through a long entrance passageway. The direction the passageway faces is important because during a short period of the year, around the winter solstice, the setting sun illuminates the interior of the tomb, casting light onto the far wall and creating a spectacular effect. The solstice light effect occurs during the shortest days of the year and is normally visible for around 20 days before and 20 days after the shortest day. The effect varies depending on the outside weather conditions, but even on the dreariest of days there is a sense of wonder that comes from experiencing the solstice from inside the tomb. We can't be sure exactly what our ancestors believed about the winter solstice, but we do know that this effect was not unique to Maeshowe. Did the solstice signal new beginnings for the Neolithic community who created it? Did it mean the turning point in a hard winter period where resources and food would have been scarce? Was there a ceremonial reason for the sunlight being recognised? Maeshowe, for now at least, remains full of mysteries and unknowns.
Some lovely footage there, and actually lots more questions, I think, about the solstice. I'm pleased to say that Colin is back here with us in the tomb again. Colin, an amazing event here in the middle of winter. Can you tell us what actually happens here in the tomb?
Well, as the sun comes to the midwinter period and sunset, the sun streams along the passage, hits the wall just here, this stone is illuminated and then spreads across this wall. But of course, there's a blocking stone in the entrance, which has given a fairly narrow space above it. So it would be more like a spotlight coming through here rather than the sort of diffuse light you see now. So and as it hits, it would expand. So it would be even more spectacular than we see it today.
And have you ever seen it yourself?
Never have.
That's such a shame. I think one of these days you'll have to make sure you're here to see it. We've actually got some images here of what happens in the tomb when the sun does shine in the midwinter. Again, you can see it just as you describe it, coming down the passage, and that finger of light you talked about. And it is really bright. I think that's the thing that always struck me about it. And as you see, gets wider and wider till it really is quite spectacular.
And that might be even, like I say, even more extreme if that hole is narrower. It really would be that sort of spotlight effect.
And why are they doing this? What is the relevance to Neolithic people?
Well, they are Neolithic. They're the first farmers. So the agricultural cycle is very important when it starts and so on. Hence, regeneration is a key point. And of course, from that point on, the light of the days will start to expand. And here in Orkney, we know only too well that in the mid-winter it's very little light. In midsummer it hardly gets dark. So those extremes are so obvious and they're so much part of life here. And to actually achieve that, maybe it goes back to what we were talking about, these standing stones in the corners, because they were standing before the monument was built. They would provide an alignment that you could actually, so basically they're aligning with that event and the monument is built around them. So very important, and you can kind of work out how they actually achieved that effect.
And what would be happening in the tomb when this effect took place? Would it be full of people?
Well, as I sort of intimated before, it may well be nothing to do with people as such. It may be all to do with the dead. And remember, the very point when this regeneration, this new year is starting, the ancestors are woken by the light shining on them.
Is there anywhere else in the world that this happens at the winter solstice as well?
Well, yes, it does. There's another massive passage grave in the Boyne Valley in Ireland called Newrange, and there it's the midwinter sun in the morning going up the passage. And in Jersey, there's Lahogue, another monstrous passage grave, so big there's a church built on the mound.
That's right, yeah, I've been there, I've seen it, it's amazing.
That's aligned on the equinoxes. But the summer solstice, of course, Stonehenge, which is open, it's not enclosed. So that's quite an interesting contrast, isn't it?
It's quite an amazing thing, breathtaking in fact. You know, the winter solstice is a really important time for all of us. You know, it's cold, it's dark, it's wet, it's miserable. One of my fellow Arcadians described recently as being in the tomb here and witnessing as the sun shone inside, and he said it was like getting a message from the past. And we don't know what that message is. Possibly it is, just as Colin says, about a time of darkness and then a time for opportunity and brightness and light coming back. I think it's a message that maybe it's just as relevant today as it was 5,000 years ago. So from all of us here at Maeshowe, thank you for listening to us. I hope you've enjoyed the programme and maybe learnt something new. Goodbye for now, and hope you have a happy solstice wherever you are.